Alright, so now I think it's a good time to add some unit tests. We have already previously added the PHP unit XML dist. If it's not the case, if you haven't done it because it was optional in one of the videos, just create one and we will add some configuration for PHP unit. But before to proceed to add some content inside of the PHP unit.xml.dist, let's install PHP unit for Composer. So for doing so, let's go to packages and there let's do PHP unit. We will install the latest version, which is a version 10.2.3. For doing so, just do Composer require PHP unit /PHP unit. And there we can go in our terminal. In my case, I can go to item. On Mac, I usually use item. And there we can just paste Composer require PHP unit /PHP unit. What we paste it, and here we just have to wait. And then dev, yes, actually we want to install it as a dev dependency. So this is actually a new feature and it's really handy because for testing unit tests, we run them only locally. We don't need PHP unit to be on production, on the production server. So we say yes. Otherwise, what I could have done, I could have used the dev flag while I was installing PHP unit there. But here we just do yes. Oh, so let's do it again. Yes. I think I had a special character there before, so this is why it didn't work. And now you can see it's been installed. It has been installed. If I go to the in composer.json, if I go here, I will see require -dev, and I will see that PHP unit has been successfully installed. Now I can go to PHP unit.xml.dist, the config file I was speaking to you earlier, and I will update that file with some XML rules. So if we go to Safari, and here, if I go to phpunit.net, and let's see the documentation, and there, documentation, I click here, the latest version, the one we have, 10.2, and here I will go PHP unit XML, that one, the XML configuration file. And here I see all of the rules, the possible ones, and as you can see, the documentation is giving me some examples of what to use. So I suggest you to have a look to see all of the possibilities you can do, and you can mention in the PHP unit.xml. In our case, I will just use the basic configuration I usually use for my other projects or for work. It's the one that most of the time always works. You can also have a look at organizing tests. So this section, organizing tests, and here you will have the full configuration XML contents we can use. Again, we always have to update this one and this one. So that's the URL if you are just interested too. So this one, and we can now, and that one, that was for the other one. And now what I will do, I will go back to PHP Storm, or for you it might be Visual Studio Code or any other code editor. And here I will have the header like what I had here, you can see. And then I will have the PHP unit XML, so basically it's this one. However, Bootstrap for us, we don't have any Bootstrap file in the test, in our test folder. and actually the test folder, we will have to add tests inside. At the moment we have nothing, so what we use instead, we use the vendor autoload to use, we need the vendor autoload to be able to have the autoload composer to have the classes and the other files being included automatically by composer autoload, the same way as we currently do for our project in the src folder. We include the autoload. If you remember, if we go to index.php in the root directory, you can see we have vendor autoload, and basically what the Bootstrap property does, it will always include the file mentioned there. So it could be either test/bootstrap if we have some rules or some constants to be initiated, but in our case it's only the autoload we need. Usually the test bootstrap file will include the vendor autoload, but in our case we just need to directly include the vendor autoload like this, and then I just use colors property to true to have the test looking a little bit nicer, the results of the test. So when we will run PHP unit, it will just look a little bit easier to understand what error failed or not, and it will be like red or green and so on. And here that's just what we need to mention, and that's a version of our PHP unit. You can see, do they mention the same? Oh, not exactly here, but that one is the one I got when PHP unit auto-generated my config file last time, because my config file was a outdated one, so it suggested me to convert, to migrate to be compatible with PHP unit 10, and this is probably why PHP unit added this. So we can leave it, or you can just use exactly how it's mentioned there. So let's continue. We have cache directory, and this PHP unit.cache, and there let's continue. We have test suite, and then the test suite is what we mentioned, unit test, and the folder will be test, where we will have our test. It's actually that one. If I zoom, can I zoom a little bit? Yeah, so that one. And then if we continue, we have source, that's our project, so it's basically src, and what we should include is any files with the php.php extension in src folder, in src directory, and then we just close the tag, and finally we have the closing PHP unit tag. And we use what they gave me here, and reformatting that one, so I could either use this one or this one, the one given from there, and the format is a little bit nicer. I will just it's I think it's 8 spaces or 6, but that's okay. Usually I tend to have 4 spaces, but for some reason the format is like 6 spaces. We can always automatically reformat the XML syntax later on, or what I could do, even if I go to settings in PHP Storm, if I type XML, if I check for formatting, so it will be here, formatting XML, and I can apply some rules, and here it will be space before. It's not exactly this one, it's not what we are looking for. Code style is probably, so that one I will just use the default one. Color schema, code style is 8, but here continuous annotation I will do 4 as well, because before it looked different. Not really. Let's see. I'm not sure this one will do anything different, but if I just select again, I do code, and if I click on reformat file, select text, oh yeah, it looks a bit better now. So you see, we could reformat it a little bit, our code, and that's pretty much it. So now if we go to the test folder, that one, in src test folder, if it's not there for you, if you haven't created already, we did in a previous video quite a while ago, but feel free to create that folder again, because it wasn't, I told you that it was optional, but at this stage you will need to have the test folder in there, test with a S, and this is what we mentioned here. Again, it could be singular too, but in our case, if you follow exactly the instructions I gave to you, it has to be plural, like this. And this is also what we have mentioned in our git. If we look, git ignore, yeah, sorry, we don't have that file yet, but usually when you're about to ship your product and you don't want, sometimes you want to exclude some files or directory, you don't want them to be there in your project when when you ship it, usually. So for a package, a library, and when we install it from Composer, you don't want some folders to be there because it's just unnecessary, such as the test folder. So what you would have is a git attributes. And actually, if we look on the internet, git attributes exclude dist, we can go to Meet with Love. That website, I think it explains quite well the reason. You see, like, you have git attributes, and so you have to mention the files you don't want to be there. With export ignore, you mention exactly this way, and so it's like the file name and then export ignore. So in our case, if we create one, and I will mention git ignore export, and then I can duplicate that one, and I will add a few, and here I will have git ignore, git attributes, I will have tests, I will have, for instance, could be also a lot of them, and we would also have PHP unit, that one. We would also create that one, PHP unit.xml.dist, and so on. And this is basically what we don't want to be in the archive when you go to a GitHub. For instance, I will go to one of mine, a GitHub package repository. You see, we have this one, and when we go to download, we have here to download the archive, it will be excluded from there. So here you see what I mentioned is pretty much the same. Test, there I have a GitHub directory, so I mentioned the .github to be also excluded, and then I mentioned the PHP unit, exactly like what we just did, and so on. And I can just copy the comment. You see, so this is the purpose of it. It's a good practice actually to do this, so that's why I just wanted to quickly show it to you. Now it's up to you. You don't have to do it, but it's always better in the long term to keep a good practice. And it will always be a winning decision in the long term. So now let's continue and let's create our first test. It has to be a folder first, entity, and that's for our entities. The name here to be user test. With PHP unit, it's really important to finish your class name, so the file name, with test. So not just user, but user test. So now let's write our first unit test. And for doing so, the first thing I will do is to mention the user test class as final. Indeed, we don't want that user test to be extended by other classes. Usually, when it's about testing, when you have a test class with PHP unit, it's a good practice to mark your class as final with the final keyword. Inheritance is not something that common when you have a single testing class, but now some could be inherited by others. In our case, it's final. Here I will also mention declare strict types to 1 because we want to mention to PHP that the types we mentioned, so the return types, the types in the argument of each function has to be strict. That means if the type is not the proper one, PHP will give a fatal error instead of trying to cast that value to the type mentioned. So strict is just like how it says, is it has to be strict every type we mention when we declare types. Now let's add our first testing method, our first testing function to be public function test. And if we look to user entity, let's test this one. So it will be the get sequential ID and the name will be test sequential ID, like this. Then return type will be void, and here in the body, this is where we will have the exciting part. So we'll have to assert the value, but first we have to update the namespace here. You see the namespace is entity, and it's a convention usually to have first the namespace of the main project. So for us it will be PH7 API simple menu, PH7 API simple menu, exactly like this. And this is what we had in our composer.json for the autoload. You see that one? Usually that's a convention, and then we would have test, and finally here, although normally with the namespace you don't have namespace in plural, but for test usually it will be with a S, and finally it will be entity because we are in the entity folder, and there we have to import our entity. So it will be PH7 API simple menu entity user, and there we will do I will have a protected function. It will be setup. It's like a constructor for PHP unit. So it will be public protected function setup, and that one is just, it behaves like a constructor. If we have to extend actually this one to test case from PHP unit, so it's from there. You can, if your code editor doesn't import automatically, just import PHP unit /framework /test case, and if we go inside of test case, you will see it does have a setup, you see, and we will use this. And usually it's a good practice to call the parent setup. So we just do parent like this setup, and inside of the setup method, what we will have this and here it will be user entity equals new user, and here we'll create an alias actually to be as user entity, like this, an alias like that. Here I will create a private property to be private. The type will be user entity, like this. And so I will create a new instance. It will be user entity. Perfect. And so here inside I do this user entity set sequential ID, and there I will just have an ID. So what I will do, I will just do like probably to be 5, like here I can do sequential ID equals 5 or 55, and there it will be sequential ID. And now we can do this assert to be assert same, because assert same is actually a strict comparison, and it means it uses the 3 equals in PHP. So you have the comparison where it's not strict, so it's not a type comparison, and the strict one will compare precisely the type, and it's always better to use the strict comparison. So we do sequential ID, so to be 55. So if you go in the seat nature, you will see what we expect and what's actual, and what's actually to be this user entity get sequential ID. And that's our first test. So let's try that one. For doing so, I go to my terminal, and there I will do PHP unit. If you have it installed, in my case I have it installed globally. So if you do v, you'd see I have the version 10. And if you don't, you can use the vendor. So if you go to, if it's not global, if the installation you have is not global, you can do vendor bin for binary PHP unit, and then you can do, actually that's it. You don't have to do anything else. You can even do v. You will see the version OSV lowercase, but otherwise you just have to run that way. And here we can see it didn't run anything actually, which I'm not sure. Did we user test entity namespace doesn't match. Oh. Entity directory to test namespace doesn't match the PSR, or maybe that's why actually, because it's in test. Let's see where it was. Entity user test. Oh, that's for PH7. No, that's fine actually. We don't need the full folders there, so we can keep as it is like this. User entity. Let's just see why the test. Oh yeah, the test is actually running. You see, it's that one, assert one. Because if I change and I do 44 here, it will fail. I didn't even see it. It's really quick, and I think with PHP unit 10, it's even faster. So now it will fail, you see? Now we can see the file name, but when it was valid, when the test was passing, we couldn't see the file name of user test. So that's why I thought it wasn't executing our test, but it was. So our test is passing, And if you have PHP unit installed globally, you can just do PHP unit. If you have the PHP unit program globally in the global scope where you can call PHP unit anywhere in your terminal, but otherwise you use the path vendor bin PHP unit. And now we can create another test, public function test. And here what we will do, it will be, if I go back to entity user, let me have a look. We can go for the user UUID. So we do test user UUID, and now void, again it returns void, so nothing. And here to be this user entity set user UUID, and here we'll create a new variable. It will be user UU, or maybe just UUID, and here we'll have the UUID library from Ramsey, like this, UUID before, and so we will use that value there, like this. So we will set the UUID, a valid UUID. Oh, and I need to do toString here, like what we did before in our user service. We also had to do toString. This is how the library works. So it just needs like UUID method. Since it would return the UUID interface, we need to use the toString to change from the object of the class to a string. If you are used to use the npm UUID JavaScript library, for instance, it works differently, but Ramsey works that way. And now we can do the assertion. So we do this, and we will assert. So it will be same again, same assert, and here to be, there we'll do UUID, and there we will do this get user to be this user entity get user UUID, exactly like that. And let's try this. So let's go back to our terminal, and you see our new test. Now we have 2 assertions and both of them works. And now we can use onSerialize for our test. It will be even easier. So if I do public function test onSerialize, because we can use all of the getters thanks to that one. So onSerialize, we are testing that one, and here you will see it will be a good one because I will be able to do this user entity onSerialize, and here what I will do, I will pass an array to it. So first I will do like user data equals, or maybe expect user data. So I will pass that one just there, that array, expect user data, and here I will have everything we need. So ID, we can test again the ID, for instance. It will be like 55, or maybe it can be a different number, just 5. Then we have user UUID. Again, we just do user UUID, and here we'll have UUID similar, Ramsey user UUID, so we have it already imported, Ramsey UUID, UUID 4, and then I will do toString, perfect. Then what else? I will have first name, So first name, and then it will be, for instance, Pierre. Then I will have last name, it will be Soria, for instance. Then I will have email, then to be pierre@ph7.me. Just an example, we can just do like me@ph7.me. Then I will have phone, and then I will just add a dummy phone number, and finally password. I will have chicken, for instance. Oops, yeah, chicken, and then created date. Well, created date, I will just take what I have in our database, and because it's, oh wait, created date, yeah, it's that one. At least that way I know the date is correct, because it's a little bit long, you see, for the format. And that created date is what we add from, where was it, when we are in user DIL, and when we create the user set creation date, you see it's from there, from that format, from the format we store in the constant. And so this is what we store in the database, in the users table, and I just copy paste just a row from a user. It was just easier. I could also have done select created date, just like that, from users where user UID and a specific user UID, and you see I have it, and it's the same. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And now I serialize the data, and then we can do the assertions. And I will have this assert same, again assert same, and it will be this one first. So it will be, I can do this way, ID. So we take that value, ID, and there we do this user entity get user, or it will be get sequential ID. Now the second one, it will be this assert same expect user data, it will be user UID, like that, and then this user entity get user UID, perfect. Then the third one, it will be assert same. Again, assert same is from our test case, and I mean from the PHP unit test case we extend. And then here it's first name, so I do expect user data, so it takes Pierre from first name, perfect. And here it will be this user entity get first name, beautiful. Then I will have assert same expect user data, it will be last name, so it will take Soria, and then it will be here this user entity get last name, beautiful. And here to be user assert same expect user data email, and then we have this user entity get email, then this assert same expect user data phone, this user entity, and it will be get phone. And finally, for the password, assert same, expect user data. Here it will be password, and then this user entity get password, and finally the last one, assert same, expect user data. It will be created date, and then this user entity get creation date. So let's test this. Let's see how it will behave, and I will do PHP unit, and again you see it looks to be working. I can even use the filter flag, and I can do user, it will be from entity user test, and then it will be test on serialize, and you see that's the one. And if I write something else for the method, it won't work. So we can mention the specific test if you just want to run one test with a filter class, the name of the class, then colon, and then the name of the method, like this. So that works. Obviously, if I change this, like here, first name, if I change Pierre to like Henry, the test will fail, you see, because expected Henry, because I changed to Henry instead of the array index Pierre, and so it received Pierre because indeed it was Pierre there. So the get first name was Pierre, and here it was Henry, so it failed. And now we can even go further by doing, oh yeah, we didn't implement them yet, and we don't have to actually, but if you look in the database recently, we have some new columns. So we have session token and last session time, but at the moment we don't retrieve them. We don't need them right now, so it's pointless to test them because they haven't been implemented yet in our user entity. So pretty much that's already a good test we have done for user test. We can now start committing what we have done. So you see, it's already a nice little test in our tests folder, entity user test. Let's commit this. Let's make sure it's still working. Perfect. All of our tests are running. And now if I do git add pflag, you see we have PHP unit that has been installed. We have the PHP unit configuration that was from the last, just a video before this one. And now we have the new files. It's git attributes. We have, oh, that one, let's add that one in our git ignore. It's important because we don't want to commit that one. So if we go to git ignore, we will just add that one in dependency. I will do like here, it will be test, and I will add that one. And I can also add php unit.xml in case we have one with .xml, because for us it's php unit.xml.dist, which is a distribution file. But if you have a php unit.xml, php unit will take into account first the php unit.xml, and in case it doesn't exist, it will fall back to php unit.xml.dist. So the .dist is like the distribution one, and if you want to customize the configuration of your PHP unit settings, you can create a phpunit.xml, but generally you wouldn't commit the phpunit.xml, so it's nice to also mention that one here. And we can then commit this. Oops, I made a typo. Yeah, so you see we have phpunit.cache, and if you look to that file, automatically phpunit will generate that one. Where is it? phpunit.cache is that one. Oh yeah, it's a folder, and you see it has this inside. It's like serialized values. Anyways, we can ignore this, and we can also add the test folder, where we have our unit test. And now we can do commit message add php unit test. Perfect. And now we can just push